But now it is time to turn our attention to the other great European country. Sorry, Spain and Italy. We'll be talking about France today. And joining us to teach us a little bit about what's going on in French politics at the moment, our guests of the day, Marlon Ettinger and Ali Haynes of the Flep24 podcast. That stands for French Legislative Elections Podcast. So, Marlon, Ali, I'll just begin here. How did two nice boys like you end up in France covering French elections?
Well, I got to correct you now. It's Flep 24/7 because it's no longer 2024. And we were going to try to do them every day, but every time I say that, we stop doing them every day. But I ended up in France because I have a French family and I live here now. Ali is faking it. He's not actually coming from France, are you?
You've outed me. My girlfriend's French, so I sort of live between France and the UK because Macron, with his, evil fascist immigration policy, is not letting me become one of them.
But here's the real answer. It's Jean-Luc Mélenchon. I know we're going to get into him later and we're going to start somewhere else, but I just learned about Jean-Luc Mélenchon, the left-wing politician, in 2017, and that sort of propelled me to come to France, get better at French, and learn more about him, and then end up reporting on all this stuff.
Well, my next question, actually, Ali, I think you'd be a good person to answer this. I love France. I love the French people, but I fear that they don't like me. Ali, what is your advice? Is there any way I can get French people to like me short of perfectly learning to speak their language?
No.
Oh, God damn it.
I still go through the experience of my French is pretty good, although I speak it with an accent. And they're still interrupting me, trying to speak like broken English at me. Even though I'm speaking perfectly, they're insisting that no, I must be an idiot. And I'm sure that's like, Marlon probably has this, probably 10 times worse for Americans.
We went on like a family trip to France when I was a kid, and my mom spoke like a little French, but she would, I don't know, try this. This might work for you. This is at a different time, but things have changed a lot. She would run out of French words, and then she would sort of speak English to them in sort of like a Count Chocula type accent, it's described as. And with no one murdered us or stole from us, or did taken to us in the entire time we were there. So I think that's they respect that more.
Okay, yeah, well,
I think they do. That's sort of my speaking Spanish method. I just speak French in a Spanish accent and try to get there.
Well, I would love for the show to do I would love for us to go to Paris to do a show there, but it is illegal to speak English in public, and I don't want to run afoul of the gendarmes. But Marlon, let's begin. It's been like a lot going on in French politics over the last 8 months or so, like elections, and I'm trying to figure out what's all went down. But I think we should begin with a scandal that has gotten no burn here in the United States, but has embroiled the current French Prime Minister in the classic scandal, Catholic school child sex abuse. Could we begin there? Could you explain what this scandal is and how it's affecting the current French government?
Yeah, it's a classic French headline. 3 men yesterday were arrested on charges of rape, sexual aggression, and assault. And basically, it's only happening now, but it's been going on since 1950. There's this Catholic school called Notre Dame de Bethlehem, a private Catholic school, which is partially financed by the state. There are 7,500 private schools in France, which are financed by the state. Everything is financed by the state, at least a little bit in France. And there was this report on February 5th by Mediapart, which is this good investigative journalism publication, that found that François Bayrou, the current prime minister, reportedly knew about these allegations going back to the 90s. Now, in 1996, there was a report of a child who was beat so badly by a priest that his eardrum ruptured, and his father sued the school. And that sort of made local news in the area, which is it's called Pyrénées-Atlantiques, the region. It's down south by Spain. It's where the mayor's from. He's the prime minister. He's the mayor of Pau, a city down there. And François Bayrou defended the school at that point, but he said he didn't know anything about these sexual assault allegations. It was a school known for disciplining bad kids. Some of his own kids went there. His wife was a teacher there. But it turned out there was also, a priest, Father Caracar in particular is one name that's come out. He was the director of the school, and in 1998, he was accused of raping at least 2 students there. And in between the accusations, he fled to the Vatican. And then when the second accusation came forward, he killed himself. He threw himself into the river Tiber. And
Classic
sort of
suicide.
Classic, yeah. And to sort of wrap it all up, François Bayrou asked about that case and regarding Father Karakar. The judge in the case, on the record, has said, yeah, he came to my house and he asked me about it. A police officer who was investigating the case said that Bayrou had called someone in the prosecutor's office to ask about the dossier, and that delayed the initial presentation of this guy, Father Karakar, coming to court, which may have helped him get away at the time, because the judge, Christian Moran, has no idea why he wasn't kept in custody in between all these accusations. And on top of that all, when this all came out, he denied it. He's denied it consistently. 2023, a lot of lawsuits started being filed as like victims came together and started talking. And he said, I had no idea about it. And one last thing on cherry on top of it, he was Minister of National Education at the time. He was president of the regional council. Beyond just his like role as a personal citizen, he had you could say he had an obligation to investigate it.
And he visited the school 1 month after the first complaint. And his wife was at the funeral of the guy who killed himself.
So, Ali, obviously the linkage of the current prime minister to like a child abuse factory is not great. Like, how is the French public receiving this news, and like, what are the implications for the current government of France? Is this guy going to resign, or like is he standing? Is he holding firm for now? What are his prospects?
He's holding firm for now, and it became a scandal because of Mediapart, but it sort of only really became a evolving scandal because one of the left-wing MPs challenged him on it and tried to get him basically to lie on record, or rather to potentially be seen to be lying on record, because we're not entirely sure of everything. But it's like a rolling scandal now. It's like up to the minute new stories about this. Just before we came on, there was another story about his wife and whether or not she did or didn't know about it. And this is a pretty fragile government in terms of its setup. I know I couldn't tell you whether or not it will definitely lead to its collapse, but collapse is becoming more likely because of this scandal, I would say.
Well, I mean, this leads to my next question. That's like confusing to me as an outside observer. Why is this guy prime minister to begin with? Because, last I heard, didn't Mélenchon essentially win the last election? And then Macron just appointed this guy prime minister? Could you just explain to me, like, how the election shook out and how this guy ended up being sort of a consensus pick for prime minister? Is that correct?
You've actually missed 1 p.m. In that sequence. But yeah, so I can start and then Marlon can pick up the thread. The EU elections last summer, Macron did not do very well. The far right were the only real force that had any kind of decent results. Macron was way down, just above the pick of the Socialist Party on like 13-14%, something like that. And so he dissolved the parliament, calling legislative parliamentary elections. This sort of forced the left together into an alliance called the New Popular Front. And between the kind of 2-round voting system, the left came out on top because just about enough centrists lent their votes to the left, though plenty didn't, in order to block the far right in the second round, and saw the left come first in the election. But the Fifth Republic is often called the presidential monarchy. And so the Sun King, Jupiter himself, basically has all the power, and he can decide whether or not to respect the results of a legislative election like that, because the left, although they won, didn't have a majority. And so he basically, and Marlon can pick up from here, but he, after sort of months of delay, because there was the Olympics, the satanic opening ceremony.
Les aristocrates, on les pendra!
Like various excuses as to why he hadn't named a prime minister. Eventually, he happened upon Michel Barnier, who was not from the left. He wasn't from the far right. He was from a kind of pretty far right, but like the traditional Republican Party, which actually got 6% of the vote. So that's kind of the state of French democracy.
Yeah. Basically, like, the left came in first, but they didn't get a majority. The tradition is you appoint the party who gets the majority, who gets the most, deputies, and they get to form a government. But instead, they picked the party that got like 30 deputies because they were afraid that the National Rally was going to vote down the government if the left was put into power, because the National Rally did really well. They came in third. They didn't win, but they came pretty close. And, if a couple of percentage points had went differently, they could have conceivably got a majority. So they choose this guy, Michel Barnier, and he lasts for 3 months, but then the right brings him down because they don't think he's fascistic enough. The left brings him down because he was undemocratically, elected. And he's passing another austerity budget, slashing all the programs, getting rid of everything good about France, which has been a process happening for decades. And why is it Bayrou then? Because Bayrou is actually not as far right as Barnier, and he's known as a centrist. He's part of this party called Union for Democracy. Funny enough, because he didn't get his party got 30 deputies in the election out of 577. His Union for Democracy, and now he's the prime minister. And apparently he threatened Macron. He said, "We're going to stop voting for the government unless you appoint me prime minister." But who is he? So he's this classic centrist guy. He's run for president over and over again. He sort of has this reputation for being a wannabe. He's always wanted to be president. He still talks about running for president, even though he's getting older and older. We all mocked him on Flep24, when there was this news that he was going to want to be prime minister, because he never gets what he wants. He always gets given a position below what he wants. He's nakedly ambitious, but kind of naively puerile. He owns this home called the White House because he thinks he's going to be president one day. But it's not the White House in French.
Wait.
It's called...
You can't be jocking America if you're a French politician. The White House? Come on, man.
It's called the White House, not the Maison Blanche. It's the White House. Anyway, so that's who he is. And the reason
has his own personal airline.
Sort of, yeah. Because also he has these 30 deputies, and Macron's been in such a precarious position where he can't get votes through. So he's been kind of influential, which is sort of how he got this position. But also there's this line from Paris Orly, which is in the south of Paris, to Pau, where he's the mayor, and he wants to be mayor and still be influential in the national parliament. So he needs a quick flight over. And this airline has been wildly unprofitable for years, and the company wants to shut it down. But every time the government tries to stop the subsidy to it, which is 3 million euros a year, Bayrou is I'm not going to vote. I'm going to bring down the budget. The budget. I need this airline to get into Paris, to get to the National Assembly. So he sort of has this influence over Macron. And when Macron ran for president in 2015, 2016, is that even true? Yeah, 2016, 2017. He was one of the first guys who supported him. So he's finally getting paid off, basically, for this support. He had if he ran, he would have probably got 6 or 7% of the vote, but he helped Macron get elected way back in 2017.
This really is scraping the bottom of the barrel of the centrists, though, at this point with Bayrou.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you mentioned the Sun King, Macron, is still president, but how would you rate? I mean, it seems like a lot of sort of center-right parties in Europe and America are moribund at the moment. How would you rate Macron and his sort of centrist coalition? What are their prospects going forward, facing Marine Le Pen and her party on the far right, and Mélenchon and his party on the left? What are the contours of power in France right now?
Yeah, so there's 3 blocks basically. The what everyone in France, this term is being taken up across the spectrum. The idea of the bourgeois bloc, which is Macron's grouping. And it is basically being ground into dust slowly as he gets more and more unpopular by Le Pen on the right and Mélenchon on the left. And so what's kind of happening is increasingly what we're seeing is these alliances forming between Macron and the far right in order to provide the numerical majorities for Macron to govern. Sometimes they govern without majorities because there is, as I said, he's a presidential monarch. There's so much power in the hands of the president. He can overrule parliament on a semi-regular basis using this thing called Article 49.3, which is only meant to be used for budgets. But what they've been increasingly doing is just packaging parts of laws into budgets in order to pass them through decree if they need to. In terms of successors for Macron, there's Gabriel Attal, who is this young gay guy. He was one of there was 4 prime ministers last year. I think he was number 2 in the list of prime ministers. But him and Macron have had a falling out recently, partly because Macron and his friends kept using homophobic slurs around the Elysee. So I don't know if he will sort of get the mandate of heaven from Macron after this falling out.
He's fine. He doesn't have any self-respect, so it doesn't matter.
Oh, yeah. There's a couple of other people that could maybe succeed Macron, but they're not. They're like there aren't many people. It was such a sort of leader-centric project that there's going to be a recomposition after him, basically.
And as far as Marine Le Pen and the far right bloc it goes, like, what are the issues that they have latched onto that have like seen them get very close to like taking power in France? And just also a little background on who Marine Le Pen is. Is it immigration? Is that like the usual fault line, or are there other issues that the far right bloc has sort of profited from?
I think it's basically immigration, cost of living, this type of stuff. And of course, they link the two. Marine Le Pen, the daughter of Jean-Marie Le Pen, who founded the National Front, the sort of far-right party, which is now, I would say, dominates. Pardon me?
I said R.I.P. Sorry.
Oh, yeah, which dominates French political life. That's the thing. Like, they've recuperated these ideas, the opposition to immigration, but I think these ideas are completely mainstream in French society. They've won ideologically. France is not some like liberal paradise or left-wing paradise, even though it has like this history. The mainstream discourse is 100% in lockstep with Marine Le Pen. The most popular cable news programs share her same ideas. There's even politicians who run much further to the right than her on all these issues, like this guy Eric Zemmour, who ran in the last presidential election. I talked to a lot of these like National Rally politicians and LR politicians. That's the traditional mainstream right-wing party, Les Républicains, which has completely jumped to the right. And they like call Marine Le Pen a socialist now, and they say like she's like weak and soft. And
who's the young gun that I see coming up on the French right wing? He's like this baby-faced kid who loves eating gummy bears, and he's from like a rough neighborhood in Paris, but like he's literally only ever had jobs in politics.
Jordan Bardella, and he used to be a big COD player too. Like you can go and find his VOD. He posted VODs.
Well, between Haribo gummy bears and Call of Duty, I think he's got some appeal here.
He has got some appeal. He's like a complete Ken doll marketing creation. But, they got him because he's like non-threatening and he appeals to like young people. He's huge on TikTok, and he'll probably take over the party if she gets judged ineligible, which is a whole other rabbit hole. But there's like this corruption case against her, and she might be judged ineligible for the next election. So he'd probably take over as the candidate.
So in light of what you said about that, like the far right and Le Pen's party, based on like cost of living and certainly being anti-immigrant, they have sort of captured the public mood and have sort of won in shifting or just reflecting the opinions of the French public. Now, on the other side, on the left here, I noticed that right as America is getting ready to get rid of our birthright citizenship, being one of the only things that makes our country unique, I saw the other day Mélenchon announcing that if you're born in France, you should be a French citizen. How does a left-wing party like Mélenchon's deal with this like enormous tide of anti-immigrant fervor, going even so far as to declare or propose birthright citizenship for France?
I guess very carefully. I don't know. Like they're not. That's the thing about the left in France. Like the left in France is great. I like Mélenchon a lot, but the reality is they're not. I don't think they are a majority of the country anymore of their views. The way Mélenchon would probably describe it and their political strategy is there's this word, well, just in English too, you conflictualize everything. You never, so of course, like the Socialist Party, the traditional left who was last elected under François Hollande, they would say, yeah, there's valid concerns about immigration. We need to adopt some of the program of the National Rally. But Mélenchon and LFI's, which is the France Insoumise, his party's theory is just the opposite. We have to conflictualize everything. Politics is not just a process of like marketing an image, but a process of both creating an electorate and activating an electorate. You educate an electorate. You educate yourself. Politics is a project of self-emancipation. We don't have to accept, the conventional wisdom. We can try to change conventional wisdom. Mélenchon is a great speaker. You probably saw that, like the thing about birthright citizenship. I was at a speech of his in Paris at the POI headquarters, which is this old Trotskyist party he used to be a member of, but is still kind of close to. And he talked for 2 hours with no notes. He's a great speaker and he convinces people. And when he debates, he convinces people. So his theory would be we need a campaign. He wants an early presidential election. There's all these rumors that Macron may step down because it doesn't have a majority. I think those have kind of died down after he named Bayrou, and Bayrou survived a bunch of no confidence votes because the National Rally didn't vote against him. But there's this constant like mood of campaigning. we're always ready for the next campaign, and we can both activate an electorate that doesn't vote and create an electorate through, the challenge of politics, which is education in a sense.
That's incredibly interesting because, I mean, I'm loath to repeat a very popular genre of article during the first 2 Trump years, but it is a little bit of the Bernie 2020 strategy, but also more like a Trump 1 thing. People kind of forget with Trump 1 that a lot of his signature policies that are still signature policies of his were like 60-40, 70-30 not in his favor by the time he became like a national political figure. And his, not really his theory, but like some of the Peter Thiel affiliates before Thiel got more involved with him, and Bannon especially, their theory was just that like you don't need this to be overwhelmingly popular when you roll it out, because you can create an electorate that isn't represented in the data we have, because people kind of don't account for how non-exhaustive the data on individual policy polling is, especially in America. But also that like even if you only achieve realistically like you go from like 70-30 to like 55 45 60-40, you've still done enough, and there's like enough polarization that math kind of will work out for you.
Yeah, voters are weird, right?
So basically the idea that they have at the moment is this thing called the fourth block theory, which is like the 3 blocks exist represented in parliament, and that there is out in the country a 4th block of abstentionists. And there's lots of data to show that the sociological profile of an abstentionist is much closer to the sociological profile of a left voter than it is to the voters of the other blocks. And they're kind of banking on being able to activate enough of them. And the other thing that they're going to try and do is, because their sort of initial theory of change was like several quick leaps to power, run these presidential campaigns in which Mélenchon is like hologramming himself around, generate a massive surge of enthusiasm in those campaigns. But I think they've kind of realized now that they're getting close, but not close enough. So they're trying to entrench a bit and rebuild like what used to be the kind of infrastructure of the old Communist Party. So they're going to run a bunch of local mayoral elections and try and sweep up those next year to try and sort of like root themselves in the country.
That's incredibly interesting because the sort of theory of activating the non-voter under the premise that like an abstentionist and a non-voter is oftentimes like to the left on most issues that they can coherently articulate compared to the rest of the electorate. Like that again, that was the theory of Bernie 2020. But in places where it's failed, a lot of the reason that people think it's failed is because, well, in order to like achieve like a critical mass of people like that, you would have to, be collecting data and organizing in a way for 5 to 10 years before that.
Yeah, you can't just parachute in.
Right. But what's interesting is with like the Bernie people, especially, even though Bernie got his start in municipal politics, that was never part of this program. But that's incredibly interesting. I mean, like obviously, municipal and mayoral politics are different in France than in America, but it's a pretty good way of like getting a bunch of people on file and figuring out their voting behavior.
Yeah, and I'll grind my axe a little here. I always think what like separates Mélenchon from people like Bernie Sanders or Jeremy Corbyn is, and I always say this line like, what is it? Left populism was never tried actually, until Jean-Luc Mélenchon, because there's this electorate that exists, and it's like a conspiratorial electorate. It's like, and I don't say that like pejoratively. It's like a conspiratorial electorate, anti-system electorate, which I think a guy like Mélenchon tapped in a lot better to than people like Bernie Sanders. I remember ahead of the 2017 election, there was like some terrorist attacks, and Mélenchon like in an interview was like, it's funny how there's always these attacks like right before the election. You know what I mean? And then everyone jumped down his throat, but he didn't back down on it. You never see that from someone like Bernie Sanders.
He's also never condemned Hamas either.
Yeah, I like everything I read from him. It is like my greatest fantasy of what like someone in the electoral left would behave like. Yeah, no, I mean, Bernie did have like a lot of outsider credibility, which just kind of shows how completely fucking obedient everyone in Democratic politics is. That just his 2016 campaign of like, I don't think the most unpopular woman in America will necessarily be a good candidate was seen as like the craziest, most anti-establishment thing anyone had ever fucking done.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, he's unbowed. That's why they call it that.
And Felix, to your point about your fondest fantasies, Marlon, I want to come back to something you said about what a good public speaker Mélenchon is, because I remember it was about a year ago where I saw a footage of a speech he was giving to a rally of supporters, and like in translation, this is the speech where he talked about nationalizing time, which sounds like sort of a goofy concept, but really what he was saying is like he articulated something that like I feel very deeply, and it was the first time I had ever seen any politician of note make this point. But essentially what he was saying is that freedom is the hours of the day that you have to yourself off the clock, like away from producing for the market. And part of that freedom is that those hours are yours to do with what you please, including doing nothing, which is a legitimate choice. Could you talk a little bit more about like that aspect of Mélenchon's message?
Yeah, there were 2 times he gave that speech. The one I think that like there's a translated video of. I was not there, but he gave that speech another time in Toulouse during his presidential campaign in 2022. And I was there. It was like this. Toulouse in the spring is supposed to be hot, but it snowed and it was like windy and it was this weird, like sort of magical energy there. And I talked to like this woman afterwards, and everyone latched onto that moment where he talked about nationalizing time. And she said he's a poet. And like, it's true. He is very poetic. He's literary, but he doesn't come off as pretentious at the same time.
He's
think
really
that
funny.
He's very funny. Exactly.
The TikTok of Charizard dancing on his desk where he says, "Go back to Macron." I love that.
Yeah, but he's like, he'll often riff up there. Felix.
That's what Donnie Deals can do. That is an ability that Donald Trump has that almost no other politician has. The ability to riff off the cuff.
Yeah. He doesn't give speeches. He sometimes has a few notes like on the back of a piece of paper. But like it's hard to explain the oratory because he like alternates between this sort of poetic, soft energy, but he's also the most contentious, like vituperative, aggressive politician at the same time, which is another part of his appeal. He's, he'll be on television, he'll be shouting in the face of the scumbag journalist representing with his finger pointed straight at him, this sort of like Mediterranean aggression that he has in him. So I think it's like that. Those 2 elements make him so great. He used to be a school teacher. He was like minister of professional teaching in the Mitterrand government. He's very educated, well-read. He's written like 12 books, but he's a fighter.
Training.
Enseignement professionnel. Yeah, I think that's a better translation. Yeah.
I just like for all these reasons, when I read about Mélenchon, I wish there was like a transfer portal system for political parties like we have in college athletics here in America. So it's like if his party doesn't win the next election in France, I think America should be able to claim him on waivers or maybe do a trade with like, we'll give you some of our top prospects for Mélenchon and his political party. I mean, look, picks. I got Shinedown #1 on my draft board right now, but let's be honest, she's got its country to run right now. So I'm just saying, like, if you lose the election, I think you should enter the transfer portal. And I would really love it if America could just like get Mélenchon on our side.
Yeah. I mean, like you guys may not want to do this, but keep in mind, how many Ruben Gallegos do you have right now?
Can I interest you in a Pete Buttigieg?
One Ruben Gallego would infinitely increase the amount that you have in the French Senate. He would go right to the Senate.
Listen, people on the streets are just whispering to each other about Ruben Gallego's brave statements in Paris.
Mélenchon has a whole bit in his book about like sugar and why fast food is bad. So not to do the European typical anti-American, but I don't know if he'd go off so hot there.
Well, he'll need some political re-education before becoming an American political party. I mean, he will have to adopt, unfortunately, a burger equals good party line. But, we have to be pragmatic is what I'm saying here.
I'll say this. If you want draft picks, there's a couple of rookies in LFE that you'll hear it here first. There's a guy named David Giroux. He's like a deputy. He's in the National Assembly for Roubaix. He's running for municipal election. He's a great guy. He's great. You look him up. There's like someone did some translated stuff of him. He has some great quotes calling like this pro-Israel guy a pig in the National Assembly and everything. So there's a rookie you should pick up. He's my favorite, David Giroux. I just wanted to boost him real quick if we're talking about draft picks. Go ahead,
Well,
Alan.
yeah. So what I was going to say, this is also, I guess, a draft pick, is in terms of like conflictuality and just like the leadership of sticking to your principles, because I think that's probably like one of the main things that lots of the other left movements have lacked. I spoke to some people in La France Insoumise during the election campaign last summer, and they were like a little bit worried about something that Mélenchon had done, which was, this was like off the record. They were just like, we're not sure this was a good idea, which was in a really right-wing seat in Vaucluse in Avignon. He ran this guy, Raphael Arnaud. And Raphael Arnaud is like not a typical politician at all. When I've met him twice, both times he was wearing like Stone Island, dressed like a football casual. He's tatted up, he's got earrings, and he led an Antifa movement that has been condemned supposedly for violence. But, you know, there is like a lot of lawfare in the French legal system. And he was this thing, Fichier S, which is like terrorism suspect. It means nothing. There are school children who have the label because the French state does engage in a lot of lawfare against trade unionists and left activists and pro-Palestine activists and all of this. There's a kind of whole like lobbying and legal apparatus for repressing that stuff. So I don't think he is a terrorist, but you know, it was like such a sort of political hot potato to invest this guy as your candidate in a right-wing seat. But their kind of social movement guys had been, you know, like doing the sort of data and stuff and think, I think we can win this. And they did. And so they now have this Antifa leader in the National Assembly. He dresses like Robespierre, and it's just like very, very different.
Well, I mean, like, it sort of returns to like, you know, if any lessons that American political parties or movements can take from, you know, like of left-wing political movements elsewhere in the world, or just politics in general, in the moment the world finds itself in, is number one, be smart, but also be rude and aggressive, and then also like stick to your principles and fuck polling. Like if you believe something to be true or right, then stand on that and fuck what the opinion polls say. Like a belief that you can change the public rather than just simply accede to their whims.
And also leave the party.
Yeah, leave the party. Leave the party.
Leave the party, but also something that is just ignored across the board. Voters can tell when you're condescending to them, even if you don't think you are. That is a huge reason, I think, behind like Mélenchon's oratory success is he's not talking down to people, you know. And again, that was kind of a Bernie thing too. But yeah, it just we brought up Ruben Gallego. He's been on our minds because he went out there and said, if you vote for Democrats, we're going to get you a big ass truck and you're going to get rich at your job. And it's like, you know, again, like voters aren't fucking geniuses, but they can tell when you are talking down to them.
Also, no one has ever gotten rich from a job. All right. Well, we're before we run out of time here, obviously French politics is, you know, does not get much notice here in America. But I do have to mention one thing that has crossed over into this country and our insane right wing. And I'm speaking, of course, about the new documentary by Candace Owens, a video titled Becoming Brigitte, an Introduction. Headline here, why false rumors about Brigitte Macron being transgender are resurfacing. So I guess I should ask you, the experts, is Emmanuel Macron's wife, Brigitte, trans?
I can't say definitively, but I don't think so. All I can say is I don't think so. I didn't know a lot about this story. You guys mentioned bringing it up, but then I went like yesterday and did a bunch of research.
And this been a thing that like has been like, did this start in France, or is this something that's been totally imported from America?
It started in France, like around 2021. These two sort of like vloggers, Amandine Roy and Natasha Ray, came out with this theory. The theory went further back, and the theory was that, well, first of all, the theory was that Brigitte Macron was born to this family, the Trogneau family in Amiens, which is where Macron grew up, and they grew up, and the young Brigitte died, and her brother, Jean-Michel Trogneau, took over her identity, but then also
as
her
one
brother...
does, usually when, you know, a sibling dies, you just become them.
just to make mother happy, pretended to be her. I don't know exactly, but and then he became transgender.
The mom has the same AI as a guard in a stealth game. Didn't I used to have 2 kids? Probably.
Exactly. Yeah. And then met Macron. And of course, like the seed of all this is that the origin of Brigitte and Emmanuel's relationship is really strange and very like disturbing. He was like, they say at first they said he was 16, but then it came out that he was definitely 15 based on the timeline. She was 39. She was his drama teacher. But some people, I think the Candace Owens and them are going with the idea that he was 14, which could be true. It's a little murky when he actually met her. He performed in a Milan Kundera play that she directed. He was big into the theater, Macron, back in the day. He was like a sensitive young man. But back to like the theory. So it's always all based on, there's like, they say there's no pictures of Brigitte Macron under the age of 40. They say you can't find her birth certificate. They say you can't find any pictures of her pregnant with any of her 3 children. Now, I talked, because again, I didn't know a lot about it, so I found this journalist called Jonathan Modab. He wrote for this magazine called Valeur Actuelle, which is like this reactionary right-wing magazine, very anti-Macron. But he looked into this theory in like 2022 and it was circulating, and he wanted to write an article about it for Valeur Actuelle, but they like didn't want to even be associated with it, the theory. But what he found was he found her birth certificate. He found the marriage certificate of her brother, Jean-Michel Trogneux, and she was the witness, like officially. He found the death certificate of her first husband, because that was part of the theory too, that her first husband had never existed. The husband that supposedly gave her the kids, and Macron cucked, I guess. Andre Ozier. But he found his death certificate, and then he like went to Amiens and he like had a picture of Jean-Michel Trogneux, which he found because Jean-Michel Trogneux is seen in footage of Macron's inauguration. He's clearly there. And he asked around, and they're like, oh, yeah, it's Jean-Michel, this guy. And he went to his house and knocked on his door, and Jean-Michel opened the door. And because he said he was like expecting a package, so he let the guy right in. But then he told him who he was, and he kicked him out. So it's kind of like, it's like transparently not true, the whole theory. And it's so like comprehensively not true. But sort of the origins of it are kind of interesting, because it comes from this magazine called Faits et Documents, which was published by this guy called Emmanuel Ratier until he died recently, I think 2016, 2017. And Faits et Documents is like known for being this far right magazine that like has some interesting stuff in it. They like have really good archives and documents into people, but it always comes with like this sort of fascistic sense of disinformation. There's always like real information and fake information in there. Like they did one on Jean-Luc Brunel, who was Epstein's procureur, and there was some like interesting information. I've looked a lot into that case that I had never heard of, but then also they claimed he changed his name from Ben Shamoul, which isn't, which is a Jewish name. And like I looked into it. Right. They have like this dictionary that have name changes the government used to publish, and it's a different guy. He has a different middle name. It's not the same guy. So that's where it comes from. Candace Owens is interviewing this guy named Xavier Poussard, who is was the publisher of Faits et Documents. And I heard, and I'm going to wrap up on this because I know we're running out of time, but I talked about this story about 10 months ago with a couple of like investigative journalists in France. And one of them said that they had been, and this is like a really good journalist who has great sources, has written excellent stuff, and has some sources in the intelligence community and stuff. And they told me that these intelligence sources were trying to feed him this story, and it confused. He was like, "Well, it's clearly not true. Why are they doing this?" And this is sort of getting to speculation, but their theory is that Macron and Brigitte kind of want this story out there, in the sense that it gets you not looking into Macron and Brigitte's past, because Brigitte Macron's really influential. She's very powerful. Like she's a big reason for why Macron became president. She had all these links in like French conservative networks that helped him come up, etc. But then if you start talking about that now, you're just Candace Owens, Xavier Poussard, Brigitte Macron's transgender. That's who you are if you look into that now. So that was sort of their theory, that this is where it comes from.
I guess my question with this is like, I saw Candace Owens talking to someone on Twitter the other day, and they were essentially asking like, let's say this could be proven beyond any shred of doubt. Like, what are the implications? And also, who cares? And then someone responded to him saying, you don't get it. She's going to take down the entire liberal global order when this becomes made known. And I'm just sort of like, it just, to me, it's an example of how degraded conspiracy theories have gotten. Because it used to be you had to tell like an interesting story that at least made sense. Whereas with this, they're just sort of like, Macron's wife is trans. After that, the world is ours. And I just like, I don't know what the ask is here or what the implication, other than to what they just to discredit Macron in some way.
This has been kind of like a long running thing throughout the Macron presidency. Like there were all of these Gilets jaunes memes back when that was happening about how gay he was. And I never really, I could never work out what the, like, I mean, that's another whole theory in itself that she's his beard, like, which is a thing that gets aired as well. But I've never
you'd have a shorter distance to go to prove that than that she's actually her dead brother.
Yeah. But yeah, like this has been like kind of a long running thing, like speculating about Macron and his sexuality and his wife and everything, because it is a really weird relationship. My own theory is that if you read the Macron biographies, he was like really, really close to his grandma, who was a teacher. And he had this sort of like bizarre relationship with her where he like, in all of the sort of things that he's written, he talks way more about her than about his parents, sort of never really credits them with any intellectual influence or anything, but always talks about his grandma. And I think it's just some kind of like weird Freudian thing where since like he talks about how her death was like the worst sort of thing of his life. And I kind of think maybe he's just replaced his grandma.
God, he's one of those guys. Yeah.
I'm a grandparent orphan.
It may be different in France, but we have this major problem in America where people are like, the worst day of my life when my grandmother died when she was 87 and I was 53. It's all been dark since then.
He is one of those guys.
Oh God, yeah.
Get him out of there. Get him out.
Like genuinely, supposedly one of the reasons that he ran against Hollande and like broke off from the Parti Socialiste was that Hollande didn't show him enough, sort of didn't take his feelings into consideration enough when his grandma died. So
he was economy minister under Hollande.
Oh, that's really splendid. All right, we'll wrap it up. We'll leave it there for today. I want to thank Ali and Marlon from the Flep24 French Legislative Elections podcast for coming on the show and just shine a little light for our dullard burger audience about what's going on in France, a nice civilized nation that's merely 1% less racist than this country, or 1% more, depending on how you look at it or who's.
If you look at the cartoons.
Depending on the weather.
Yeah. All right. Ali, Marlon, thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, guys.